Boss forgets to fire me, so I get paid for doing nothing. This story is from June 2012, a couple of months or so short of 12 years ago. I've generalized my exact work for anonymity. This story takes place in Australia, where we have very stringent laws around employment, firing, hiring, redundancies, maternity, and all the other jib-jab. A little bit of background, I'd started working for this particular company in March 2011. I was hired basically on the spot once I demonstrated my knowledge of the product that I'd be working on, and I started 2 days later because of a deadline that had to be met. I had a very specific contract for what I did. I was thrown in the deep end, a sleepless 7 days followed, but by the end I managed to do a decent job on the first of many products. 2 months after, my direct boss, the general manager, was let go and not really replaced properly, but a consultant took over their responsibilities. I should also add that the majority of operations were in Australia, while a smaller team operated in the UK, which is also where the CEO was based, despite 80 to 90% of products coming out of our office. Towards the third quarter of 2011, the CEO's contract ended and was not renewed. So the hunt began for a new CEO who was eventually found and began working also in the UK location. After a very busy 2011, hiring approximately 30 new employees and launching a bunch of new products, business was booming. Until the second week of January 2012. By this point, upper management couldn't stay on top of everything, bringing in the COO of the parent company to oversee operations in Australia. Because we had a lot going on, but the CEO was based in the UK and new. At that point, we had a group meeting where we learned the future of the company and that operations in Australia would cease on June 30th, 2012, which is the end of the financial year in Australia. This was followed by management explaining that everyone except a handful of people would be made redundant with payouts. The handful who would remain will instead be made redundant after finishing their projects at the end of 2012. So over the next 5 months, as operations were slowly winding up and people started to exit the company, I'd lined up a few job interviews, and one of these was my dream job, based in Europe, working in the exact field I wanted to be in. I kept this quiet, telling only a handful of my closest friends at my still current job. The recruitment process took quite a few weeks. Many late-night Skype interviews, general chats. It was a big job and a massive interview process. And towards the end of May, I'm still in the running for this dream job. And by this point, pretty much everyone else knows, wishing me luck. Around comes the start of June and everyone starts to get their redundancy letters, giving them 28 days of official notice outlining their pay schedules and all legal entitlements. When I say everyone, I mean everyone except me. I find this very strange but quickly realize that it's because if I hand in my notice, I won't be entitled to a payout and the company gets to save a few $1,000s. This is where my malicious compliance kicks in. I keep quiet and don't say anything. By about the second week of June, I find out that I didn't get my dream job, and I tell one other person but make sure they don't tell anyone else. Fast forward to the last week of June, and now there's just 7 employees left, including me, in the office, alongside the general manager, COO, and CFO. At this point, whether they forgot about me or were hoping that I'd leave before they had me pay out is debatable. I was the third most senior person there by this point, so I'm sure they would have kept tabs on whether I would resign or not. At some point, after most of finance and HR was gone, they must have forgotten to follow up and check. It would have saved them quite a few $1,000s. Not to mention, every time I was asked about the recruitment process, I'd play it up and say they wanted someone to start right away. I wasn't going to give them any real ammunition. I had no work to do since my project was on hold pending the sale to the competition, so I just used their high-speed internet to browse the internet and apply for jobs. Everyone except me had packed up their desks, and at this point, I'm just basically showing up to be social and reminisce. On the second to last day, I run into the COO. Remember, he was from the parent company brought in to oversee the winding up of operations. He comes up next to my desk and he goes, "You must be really saddened that tomorrow's the last day." And casually I respond with, "Oh, is it? I know it'll be quiet, but I didn't realize it was my last day." He takes a closer look at my desk, still not packed up, and has the most confused look on his face and responds with, "Yeah, it's everyone's last day. Why wouldn't it be your last?" "Oh, I never got a redundancy letter." At this point, I can see the expression on his face go from, "Huh," to, Oh crap. In the hope that I'd get a different job and resign so I don't get redundancy entitlements, among everything else going on, between the GM, COO, and CFO, they forgot to issue me an official redundancy notice. I can see the cogs turning in his brain as he realizes and goes, "Oh, come see me in my office in 30 minutes then." Half an hour later, I go to his office and he's sitting there with the CFO by his side, but also kind of behind him. There's a few papers on the desk and I sit down and he starts, "Sorry we didn't do this properly at an earlier point, but here's all your redundancy paperwork." The first piece of paper is the official letter. I pick it up, start reading, and the first thing that catches my eye is the date. It had been backdated to 27 days previously. Now, this is a 2-copy letter that needs to be signed by both employer and employee. I put it down and go, "That's not today's date." He gets flustered and responds with, "Sorry, we forgot to get it to you, but the notice was issued on that day." Well, it might have been issued then, but this is the first I'm seeing of it, and your note hasn't been signed by me. "Yeah, but you did know this was coming." "I did, but I assumed I'd be retained for longer because I wasn't given official notice."
"Well, what do you want us to do with it now?"
"Put today's date on it and I'll sign it."
"But legally we need to wrap up operations before the end of the month. We can't do that."
"You could try to fire me instead, but I don't think Fair Work Commission would be satisfied with your reason of me not wanting to sign a falsified redundancy letter." At this point, he's very flustered. Meanwhile, I'm just laughing my butt off in my head. Just to give you a brief insight, this is a man who brought a very expensive luxury European car a week before telling everyone that the business was closing, and didn't drive to work for a week after sharing the news. I had absolutely no sympathy for this man and didn't care what bridges were burned. He goes, "Okay, let me change this for you." He disappears, comes back with another copy with the correct date. "Okay, here you go." "I'm not signing this yet."
"Why not?"
"Well, I've got 28 days more of legal employment now, which means I'm owed an extra day and a bit in annual leave in my final pay schedule." He looks at the CFO and the CFO looks at him and nods in agreement. He changes my payout schedule, adding another day of annual leave to it, prints it out and hands it to me. I carefully look over everything. It's all in order now. I sign the paperwork and we both get copies.
"So, what'll you be doing here for the next 28 days?
I say, "Nothing. I'm not coming back in after today."
"But you're legally employed for another 4 weeks. We can't be paying you for nothing. You should help out the IT guy and pack up some boxes."
"There's nothing in my contract about packing up boxes, so I won't be doing that. Also, if you read my contract, it says I'm employed to work on this one specific project only, and any other work outside of this needs to be agreed on separately. And since you sold my project to the competition yesterday and is no longer part of this company, I have no further contractual obligations to fulfill." By this point, the CFO is barely holding in his laughter. The CEO is so flustered.
"Well, that's not fair. We have to pay you for an extra month for nothing."
"That's not my problem. My contractual obligations have been fulfilled. I'm going to go pack up and go home at 5 p.m.
"Okay, well, please make sure it's not before 5 p.m.
I get back to my desk and pack it up in less than 5 minutes. Put all of my personal belongings in a box and just sit around doing nothing. One of my colleagues who was remaining for a few more months comes over and asks, "What was all that about?" And I explain everything in detail. He lets out the biggest booming laugh, goes to his office, closes the door, and continues laughing. 15 minutes later, the CFO comes over and goes, "You don't have to stay until the end of the day. You can take off whenever you want." And this is the story of how I got an extra month's pay due to the management's incompetence. In an amazing turn of events, I ended up being hired by the competition, where I continued to do the same work for the next 6 years. It was a bit sneaky, I admit. Am I the jerk? Yeah, it sounds like you played that one like a pro. I think they were definitely keeping tabs on you and hoping to save a couple of extra grand. Then they had to pay that amount on top of a needless month's salary when everyone else had already left. I wouldn't call you a jerk. They played some really sneaky, tightwad games and have only got themselves to blame for the fact that it didn't work out. Gotta say that our author was very cool about the way they played this, but then again, I suppose you had a lot of time to plan it. A month of what sounds like a good corporate salary for no work. That sounds like paradise. I also love that they had the nerve to say it's not fair. Guys, this situation is on you for trying to play this in the first place. You don't get to whine when your employee calls you on your illegal crap and takes what he's due under law. If the company is feeling the pinch that bad, maybe the COO can sell off his sports car. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, linked below. Also, go to AmITheJerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. Only do accounting work during your 2 weeks' notice. After working at a toxic office job for a few years, I decided it was time for me to leave. I gave my bit more than 2-week notice and started to organize my myriad of tasks to hand off. I was an accounts payable assistant, and the company had created my position and added various tasks with other departments over the years. I helped with accounting, inventory, audits, customer service, marketing, sales, and events. My primary manager, we'll call her Barb, was the accounting manager, and there was always a struggle because she assigned the extra work to me, but then refused to acknowledge that I did jobs for other departments than hers. She was the primary reason for me leaving. Every day during my notice, I ask her if we can have a meeting to discuss my different tasks, how I've organized them, and how to complete them, as no one does these tasks in the company but me. She refuses to meet with me and reminds me to keep up with deadlines. No problem, Barb. For the next 2 weeks, Barb doesn't remove a single task from my plate. She refuses to meet with me for any reason and consistently sends condescending emails about the lack of work effort she's seeing from me. I don't have the emails saved anymore, but they all included the same message: "I'm the boss, just do your job." I brought this to the owner's attention since I worked closely with her, and about how I felt like there was no bridge to the next person in my position. I was told, "Barb runs the accounting department, so just do what she says." Yes, Mom. I showed up every day and worked as if I wasn't leaving. Other managers asked me who was taking over tasks I handled for them, and I referred them to Barb. She told them she handled accounting, not their departments, and to stop wasting her time. She then told me to only work on accounting-related tasks as that was the position, regardless of the last few years of my tasks being spread across the company. I got this in writing and printed a few copies to cover myself. On my last day, Barb called me into her office and scolded me for ignoring 75% of my duties. Specifically, inventory was due that day and I hadn't begun it. I reminded her of her accounting work-only demand, which she claimed she wasn't referring to inventory too. She told me to compile a list of all the non-accounting jobs I handled, to which I was prepared with a list. Many of these had deadlines missed or coming soon, but I'd ignored them per her instructions. I was told that if I didn't meet my deadlines for the week, she wouldn't give me a good reference. She also told me to stay as late as I needed to finish up. I didn't need her reference, and I wasn't staying late on my last day. I forwarded the email of her telling me to not complete any other jobs to the owner, along with the list of missed or close deadlines that wouldn't be met now. Then I clocked out and left and never returned. This was years ago, and from what I've heard, she still runs the accounting department for them. I was the one blamed for tasks not being complete. Oh well. In short, boss tells me to only do accounting-related tasks at work for my last 2 weeks, and gets upset when only accounting work is complete. Well, it would have been far more satisfying for us on YouTube if old Barb had actually been held accountable for wrecking everything, and then been flogged through the streets followed by a nun shouting, "Shame! Shame!" But I suppose that in the vast majority of life cases that we don't hear about on the channel, this is probably how these people keep their jobs. Deflect, blame, be friends with her higher-ups, and ultimately avoid serious consequences. You even gave them grounds to hold her accountable and hire someone better by sending all the evidence to the owner. I guess that sounded like too much work. I guess if you really wanted to at least wreck her reputation, you could have shared it to all the people whose tasks you didn't do on her command. But oh well, kinda seems like you were holding a bunch of things together there. If treating you like that meant that things turned into an absolute clusterfrick after you left, then Barb and her company absolutely deserved to have that happen. You can't pick up extra time because you had too many sick days. So I'm a nurse at a large hospital. The floor I worked on was selected to be the COVID unit during the first and second waves. More nurses than not were catching COVID. So whenever I got an inkling of being sick, I'd call out and get tested. Now, if I tested positive, then I'd get 2 weeks off without penalty. But I tested negative and returned to work. I got called into the office and got a verbal warning because I had one too many sick days. I said to my manager, "You realize we're in the pandemic, right?" And she says, "Yes, I know, but we still have to stick to the original policy. When we clock in, there's an electronic message that pops up on the time clock that reads, 'During the pandemic, we need to self-monitor ourselves, and by clocking in, you're declaring that you're fit to work.' There was no adjustment to the policy even though we were on a COVID unit during a pandemic. So I'd either have to lie about feeling sick when I clock in or call out and get in trouble. So here's where the malicious compliance comes in. I'd always picked up a lot of extra time in a sister department. Not because I needed the extra money, but because the hospital was always short-staffed. My manager didn't like the fact that I picked up extra time at the other department. She wanted me to pick up the extra time at our department. So she said, "As a punishment, you can't pick up extra time in the other department for 90 days, the length of my disciplinary period. You should be responsible enough to pick up extra time in your own department." As I didn't need the extra money, I didn't pick up any extra time in that period. I got called almost every day to ask if I could come in because they were short-staffed, and one of the reasons they were short-staffed was because of our sister unit being even more short-staffed, and the nurses on my unit were getting pulled to go work there. If only more nurses picked up extra time in that other unit. At the end of the 90 days, I was told that I could pick up extra time in the sister department again, at which point I handed in my 2 weeks' notice and told her I accepted a position at another hospital. She then tells me that because of my years of service, I need to give 4 weeks' notice. I tell her, no, that's just a courtesy, so I'll extend the same courtesy I got when I needed to call out sick. Cripes, you'd think we'd value our essential workers more and allow them more leeway for things like this, especially during a fricking pandemic. The healthcare workers in my family all got their sick calls made unlimited and unconditional during that time. And sure, that's potentially risky for the hospital, but it turns out that looking after your staff well creates more loyalty than chewing them out for looking after themselves. For this particular workplace, I do feel a bit bad for the colleagues who'll have to cover for the author after they quit, but I say that we blame the manager here for creating an environment so hostile and resentful that it created more work for everyone. And with any luck, that job will be filled pretty quickly once the hospital realizes it needs a hiring drive when the situation gets too desperate. I hope that the general conditions for nurses have become a bit less crazy post-pandemic, but honestly it feels like healthcare workers being overworked is just a fact of life. You want to make things fair? Oh, I'll show you fair. A couple of weeks ago, my kids and their neighbors decided to have a bake sale. We live in a tourist area with a high foot traffic, and the kids were making a killing. I tell the kids I ought to charge them for the labor, because I said I'd help bake, and ingredients so they learn the concept of net gains, but instead I'll donate to their cause and just to bring me back the money I lent them to make change. I love seeing the kids be entrepreneurial, work so hard, and get so excited at their success. After a couple of hours, the neighbor's son decides he's bored and wants to go home. So he tells my kid, "When you're done, come by and deliver half the money." My kid says, "Hey, that's not fair. If you're leaving, we should split the money now." Mind you, the bulk of their sales were in my baking. The neighboring kid gets super annoyed, but mine sticks to their guns, and they split the money and the kid leaves in a huff. Mine comes in a few hours later having lugged home all the gear and cleaned up, annoyed that the neighbor kid got annoyed at them. Then I get a knock on the door. It's the neighbor's mum, with the kid who's still pouting. Mum is holding a receipt. Mum explains that they purchased a bunch of stuff for the bake sale. It cost a lot of money, and it's not fair that my kid is making money off their stuff, and that they should be compensated for what they purchased. The receipt lists a bunch of items I immediately see that they didn't use, like 2 boxes of cereal when they used one, napkins that I'd ended up providing, but whatever. And never mind that her son went home early and left mine to clean up. And never mind that I'd been churning out batches of cookies all morning. I'm irked that they've taken what was a fun, cheerful day of kids making money hand over fist and shown up at my door making me engage in a super awkward conversation because they assume their kid can't be wrong. So I say, "Of course," and I fetch my receipts. I sit down in front of them and out loud calculate the cost of lemonade and cups used. I calculate the cost of flour, sugar, chocolate chips, vanilla, and butter per batch of cookies, multiplied by the number of batches made. I toss in the baking soda for free because I'm so generous. I even subtract the value of leftover cookies. Did I mention I made a lot of cookies? The neighbor kid has to fork over $23 to me. They got pretty quiet all of a sudden. I thanked the lady for making sure things were fair and offered her a plate of cookies to take home. She declined. The end. Well, hopefully the kid and parent learned from that encounter. Sounds like author and her offspring were the right mix of assertive and smart, I'm not sure that as a kid I'd have been able to realize in time that the other kid was trying to take half the money for doing a third or whatever of the total work until my mum pointed it out. And the neighboring kid got his equally entitled mum involved. Not cool, Timmy from next door. Do your share of the work, take your share of the money, and don't try to turf everything onto someone else. It's not too late for you to mend your jerk ways and end up the hero of one of our stories in the future. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. Or if you want to check out some great music, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, give Am I the Genius a shot. Everything linked in the description.